This, I suppose, is going to be a high-speed meandering through my life from when I first started working straight from school, and the turbulent, I would say it was quite turbulent at times. I came from a military family. My father, my grandfather, I was the 9th one in my family to join the Royal Marines, so basically a family of idiots, I think, because nobody ever learned the lesson. And I joined the Royal Marines at 15 and a half because I couldn't wait to get away from home, because I had a very violent alcoholic mother. My dad was great, but I just didn't see a lot of him because he was always away working. So, earliest opportunity I could, as soon as I was 15 and a half, because I joined in the 80s, and you could still join at that age then, as a junior Marine. And I joined, my dad signed on the dotted line for me, and that was me. So, I spent 8 months getting thrashed and conditioned and moulded into what they wanted me to be. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. I was, as I'm sure you can imagine, I was quite an angry, stroppy little sod. With the way things had gone, so it really channeled my energy in a very constructive way, mostly for them, but it made me gave me control, which was something I was lacking. So I took huge advantage of that, and I went course after course. After about 4 years, I applied for Special Forces selection, and managed to get on a course. Mostly because my father was in the SBS as well, and he still knew people that were in, and it got me a bit of a head start on some people, because they knew I was a known quantity to them, despite the fact that I was a snotty little scrope, as they quite often told me. It's charming. But, and it never stops, actually, right through your career. So there's always somebody who's older and more experienced than you and gives you the shut up stroke. So that's I then went on to I spent the first Gulf War running around as part of as a newly fledged, very green member of the SBS, and to be quite honest, had a great time, because I was just blowing shit up all the time. Didn't really get involved in a ridiculous amount of stuff at the time, and it didn't last very long. So, as I say, horses for courses, and I actually thoroughly enjoyed my career. I spent my last 3 years in the military, seconded to the intelligence services, and that led me to going to Bosnia, and basically recruitment is what the job was called. Not your standard stuff you get from Reed or AAA or anything like that, but it was a very unusual period of time being in the Balkans at that point, and it ended my military career, because I managed to get caught up in what was affectionately known as a mortar storm, and I caught some shrapnel in my shoulder, and it ended up with me being medically discharged. Fortunately, my boss at the time, who had said, well, you don't need to be physically 100% fit, we recruit all sorts of people to do the job that you're doing. So I signed off from the military on a Friday, signed back on as a contractor for the intelligence services on a Monday morning, and that was me working on and off on short-term contracts for another 9 years after that. I left the military in '99, and I finished the other nonsense in 2008. Along that way, as I was leaving the military, my marriage was going down the pan. A friend of mine had just tried to commit suicide. He'd actually shot himself, put a pistol in his mouth, pulled the trigger, and he survived. How, I don't know. His nickname was Terminator after that. So I know, always humour in the dark side. So he, as I was leaving, that was one of the very turbulent bits, and it just I meandered down the rabbit hole, and I became very good friends with Uncle Jack. So much so we'd meet for breakfast, and that was us for the rest of the day. So I spent a very awkward time, and that introduction to, ironically looking back, with my friend trying to commit suicide, led me down to the path and to where I am now, which is I founded 2 years ago with a friend of mine a mental health charity for veterans and uniformed services, because on the way through my life I retrained in psychology and psychotherapy. So I now, the tools, paradox really, the irony of this, is the tools I use to put people in impossible situations working for the government, I now actually use them to unravel people's minds and get them back on the straight and narrow again. So it was quite an eye-opener for myself actually, seeing these same tools that I'd learnt to be used for different purposes. So with many things, it's the intent behind the use that's that gives it its meaning, really. And I've dealt with some people who have been on the extreme end, toes on the abyss. Some people one guy who phoned me at 1:30 in the morning, got my number from somebody else I treated, and he FaceTimed me at 1:30 in the morning, stood on the chair with a noose around his neck, drinking vodka. So I was awake very quickly. Fortunately, he's doing well. He's back to work. He's now in a new relationship, and he's doing extremely well. But and that's a team effort. There's lots of other organisations that we work with that help to get these people back on their feet. But this whole thing that I'm sure you've seen, PTSD with veterans and suicide rates and how it's increasing, but a lot of it is more publicity. But there was a guy 21 years ago, after his friend had tried to commit suicide, it had driven him to the point of suicide, and he was sat on the edge of his sofa, and he was in the military, and he had a pistol, and he said goodbye to all his friends in a very subtle, under the radar kind of way, so that nobody knew what was going on. He'd planned it. As one guy I treated said, he'd actually planned his death to within an inch of its life, which I thought was quite nice actually. So this guy sat on the sofa, and this door, as he was sat there with the pistol in his eye socket, going to pull the trigger. I apologise for the dark side of this, but it will get funnier. The doorbell rang, and he got really annoyed because he'd been interrupted. His flow of thought and action had been interrupted. He got really quite annoyed, so he put the pistol under the sofa cushion, went to the door to answer the door, and it was one of his oldest friends, a guy he'd known since he was 4 years old, who'd picked up on something when he'd phoned to indirectly say goodbye. And this kind of sparked in my mind that perhaps there's just these little things that people give out, these little indications that when people are struggling but they don't want to admit to it. And they're hard to see, but when you actually know what they are, they kind of stand out like a big bright beacon. And if that guy hadn't rung that doorbell, I wouldn't be here talking to you now today about how that led me to where I am and what I'm doing. So thank you very much.